On 1st March 1979, Boyce Rensberger reported in a 1979 New York Times article about a discovery in a title, Nubian Monarchy Called Oldest. In the article, Rensberger wrote, "Evidence of the oldest recognizable monarchy in human history, preceding the rise of the earliest Egyptian kings by several generations, has been discovered in artifacts from ancient Nubia. A newly discovered ancient kingdom is always a matter of interest, but when it precedes the earliest known monarchy, the unification of Egypt in the 4th millennium BC, then history itself is reborn. The place is ancient Nubia at Qustul, where the investigation of archaeological materials recovered during the great 1960s rescue effort has recently unveiled a birthplace of pharaonic civilization several generations before the rise of the first historic Egyptian dynasty." Those were the words of Bruce Williams, who was then an archaeologist at the University of Chicago. One thing has always been consistently mentioned, that Kemet, or Egypt, was the oldest civilization on the planet. While it was the most advanced and one of the most important ancient civilizations, evidence now suggests that it may not have been the oldest. Another region in the Nile Valley that extends from northern Sudan to southern Egypt, now known as Lower Nubia, appeared, but not a lot of attention was paid because of the focus on Egypt. Egyptians called the region Ta-Seti, which means the land of the bow, as a reference to Nubian archery skills. The early dynastic period of Egypt traditionally begins around 3100 BC with the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt under the first pharaoh, Nama. However, evidence in Nubian sites suggests that Nubian cultures, including Ta-Seti, were highly developed by the time of the early dynastic period of Egypt. In 1962, a research team headed by Keith C. Seele, who was the director of the University of Chicago Oriental Institute Nubian Expedition, discovered a pharaonic dynasty in Nubia that predated the first pharaonic period in Egypt by several centuries. An incense burner discovered at the Nubian site of Qustul dated to around 3500 BC, suggesting the presence of complex societies in Nubia that may have predated the early Egyptian dynasty. This incense burner is distinctively Nubian in form. Carved in the technique of Nubian rock art, it is decorated on the rim with typical Nubian designs. It was discovered in the tomb of a Nubian ruler at Qustul and incorporates images associated with Egyptian pharaohs that came later: a procession of sacred boats, the white crown of Upper Egypt, the falcon deity Horus, and the palace facade called a Serek. It appears to represent a ritual that involved a royal procession by boat to a palace. Since the incense burner was broken and had to be pieced together, the portion bearing the body of the king is missing, but Dr. Bruce Williams said that scholars agreed that the presence of the crown in a form well known from dynastic Egypt and the god Horus are irrefutable evidence that the complete image was that of a king. Dr. Williams further stated that the majestic figure on the incense burner was the earliest known representation of a king in the Nile Valley. His name is unknown, but he is believed to have lived approximately 3 generations before the time of Scorpion, who was the earliest known Egyptian ruler. Scorpion was one of the 3 kings said to have ruled Egypt before the start of what is called the First Dynasty at around 3100 BC. Dr. Williams said the dating was based on correlations of artistic styles in the Nubian pottery with similar styles in pre-dynastic Egyptian pottery, which is relatively well dated. He said some of the Nubian artifacts bore disconnected symbols resembling those of Egyptian hieroglyphics that were not readable but were on their way to literacy, probably quite close to Egypt in this respect. According to Ivan van Satima, in a lecture, palaces were found along with the falcon deity Heru, which the Greeks called Horus, which is later found in Kemet. The beginnings of the Medu Neter, a secret writing system called hieroglyphs by the Greeks, were also found. One of the most significant finds was the crown of the south before the unification of Kemet on the heads of a dozen pharaohs prior to the first pharaoh of Kemet. The depiction of 12 other kings before the one presiding on the incense burner gave Ta-Seti hundreds of years on Kemet's first dynasty. Many scholars place the origin even further back. According to Boyce Rensberger, it was around the early 6th millennium BC that dynastic Ta-Seti is said to have come into existence. He estimated that the first kings of Ta-Seti may well have ruled about 5900 BC. The migrants into the Fertile Crescent, which would later form Egypt, at the time were still getting agriculture together, while Nubia had established a monarchy, which was a clear social order for humans. Further research cannot be carried out since the archaeological cemeteries at Qustul are no longer available for excavations due to the flooding of Lake Nasser. The rescue effort in the 1960s was to retain and document as many materials and artifacts as possible before the waters from the construction of the two Aswan dams creating Lake Nasser covered the entire area. The reason so much emphasis has been put on Egypt is that it was where ancient civilization reached its peak, but the reason for Nubia's desertion cannot be explained. Many scholars have been consistent in denying, despite the facts, the role of Nubia in acquisition of civilization. Even Keith Seele, who first began the research at Ta-Seti, did not reveal his findings while he was alive. This finding implies that when we refer to the world's oldest civilization, we have to go beyond just Egypt itself and reach into Sudan, which is commonly referred to as Nubia. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you soon in our next video.